are talking Ghastlies. Now, if you have seen the movie Gremlins, this started off this kind of creature feature, kind of mini creature feature kind of phase that was then aped by the movie Critters in a slightly lower budget effort. And then Critters was aped by Ghoulies in again kind of slightly lower budget fashion. And then after that you had Munchies, which was a cheaper version of Ghoulies. And now at the bottom of the barrel you have Ghastlies. This one is directed by Brett Kelly and is a super low budget, knowingly kind of schlocky B-movie about these three killer puppets, for lack of a better word. Anyway, so what is the story? In a quite an amusing fashion, which I thought was a bit of a missed opportunity actually, we have this opening where we have these devil worshippers that are going to sacrifice this woman for some reason. It's never really explained. And we have this kind of, at the same time it happens, this UFO comes down and these three little creatures get out. Now what I thought was a missed opportunity here was to kind of these Satan worshippers to think they've summoned demons, when in fact aliens just happen to come down at the same time, which is where I thought it was going to go, but it didn't go there, so the whole devil worship thing was a missed opportunity. But anyway, we have this kind of group of four kind of teenage girls that go into this kind of like, you know, holiday home in the, kind of the woods somewhere to do little sorority stuff, I suppose. And you got the typical kind of, you know, you've got the mean girl, you've got the innocent one, all of that sort of stuff. Anyway, we have these kind of like these three little kind of aliens that are in the forest that are ultimately going to attack this quartet of girls, along with anyone else who happens to kind of walk by, including a couple of lads, some police officers and such. So that's your kind of your movies. Let's talk Ghastlies. So obviously a super low budget movie. I will have to say the IMDb rating of this one is one of the lowest I've ever seen. It's 1.2, which is one of the lowest ratings I've ever seen. And bear in mind, I see a lot of B movies, and this one is one of the lowest IMDb ratings I've come across. But I've got to be honest with you, although this is by no means a good or even average film, it's not 1.2 bad. Now why do I say that? Well, for a start, I think this movie does show some confidence behind the camera. Now, I've reviewed films that are very cheaply made, and you have stuff like the camera in poor position and stuff like that. But I've got to say, with this film, I actually thought the camera work for a start. I mean, we're talking about some basic stuff here, maybe, but the camera work was all fairly good here. And I've got to say, it seems somewhat proficiently made behind the camera. The sound, we'll come on to the sound again, but there wasn't ever an instance, for example, where someone's standing too far away from a mic, which I've seen in certain like real below budget films, stuff like that. Everyone's in frame, it's always kind of in focus. The movie's actually reasonably kind of well paced, for obviously again for a kind of a low budget kind of schlocky movie. The characters are kind of quite well defined. So there are some stuff here, although this movie, you know, I'm going to struggle to find much, you know, to really sell you with it. I do think some of the fundamentals here are actually not as bad as a 1.2 rating would have you believe, because I do feel this movie seems at least like it's not just a complete bundle together with people who have no idea about how a camera or a mic works and stuff like that. So that, in a technical aspect, I didn't think the actual construction of this film, at least, was too bad. And yet, although this kind of plot has obviously been done to death now, I didn't think it was it was a fun idea. The effects are super cheesy, but you know, I've got to say, I still had a little bit of fun with it. The flying saucer at the beginning, I thought, oh, this is going to be like kind of like Plan 10 from outer space, basically. It's going to be like some, you know, obviously knowingly shocky B movie, and it is, but not quite in the direction that I thought it was going to go. At least the characters seem somewhat reminiscent of ones that you've kind of seen before, and you know, they're relatively well played. I think the four girls, I actually really quite liked one of the kind of I guess the one whose house it was. I think she's got red curly hair. I actually quite liked her character. I thought actually she seemed quite balanced, if that makes sense. not too extreme. The bitchy girls are like a little bit too bitchy. The innocent girls are that typical kind of like, you know, pretty ugly thing where she takes the ponytail off and the glasses off, and all of a sudden she's kind of like, you know, really hot and all that. So, but the other two, I would say, are actually kind of just regular, normal, you know, normal, so they're kind of written to be a bit more kind of genuine to a certain degree, not quite as a caricature. So the movie's not overly long, so I think it does go at a kind of, you know, a reasonable pace. And there are some, obviously this is going to be like a horror comedy, and although there's lots of misses with the humour, particularly in the aspects of these two policemen that show up. This Canadian production does have a couple of, you know, smile-inducing moments that are kind of like at least mildly amusing. Now, obviously, this is made to be silly, schlocky movie with kind of like cheap special effects, and yeah, I mean, it's never going to, it's not pretending to be anything else, but that's still, I feel, you have to, now we move on to some of the negative stuff here, you can't kind of get away with stuff just because you're self-aware. Now, without ripping on the obvious, as you will come on to, the one aspect here where I felt this movie could have done a better job, legitimately, and was a failing not to do with anything with the budget here, was the sound, the soundtrack and some of the sound effects. The soundtrack here was severely lacking, and there's got this kind of this little electronic ditty that kind of goes along, and there's things that needed to have some music with them but didn't, and when the music is playing, it's poor choice, shall we say. And then we have the sound effects with these kind of these little creatures, whatever you want to call them, the ghastlies, when they're eating and they're kind of like this laughing, this chuckling, and the sound effects are so bad, it makes the film almost seem cheaper than it is, if that makes sense. And I felt if they just had different sound effects, it could have got away with not seeming quite as cheap. Now, the actual creatures themselves, this is going to be, they're not designed to be realistic. They look like stuffed animals, really. So, but they're not. They're literally someone's got a hand puppet and kind of like moving it around. So that's the conceit. You can say the conceit is that they look like hand puppets. Now, again, it's a missed opportunity because no one ever just says, oh, they think it's a toy, which is what they look like. I mean, they say, oh, it's a weird looking raccoon, but it's because they are essentially hand puppets. To me, it would have been an obvious kind of thing to have people confuse them with toys, but that joke is never picked up on. So that's kind of two fairly obvious jokes, if you ask me, that were never kind of really picked up on. Anyway, but they are, yeah, I mean, they look, obviously, they're ridiculous, but they're designed to be. So, but they're not kind of, I mean, they're not animated. It's literally just, you know, someone in a kind of hand puppet. They pose no real kind of legitimate threat, if that makes sense. But obviously they do kill people, and there's lots of kind of like, you know, a fake blood that sort of splurts out in some kind of quite amusing attacks that are really seem somewhat less than savage, shall we say. The acting, like I've said, I don't think the acting is terrible, if I'm honest. For this kind of like, you know, you look at this kind of rating, you think, oh man, the acting's got to be too bad. And yeah, there are some characters. These two policemen, these cycle, you know, cops or whatever, they are truly bad and terrible actors, and they should have just been taken out of the plot, if you ask me. But the actual four girls and the kind of I mean, they're not bad, they're not great, don't get me wrong, but I mean, I was expecting a massive car crash with this one, and it wasn't quite as bad as I was expecting. And maybe when I looked at the rating before I watched this film, so I was bracing myself for something horrible, and it wasn't as bad as I was expecting. Should you see this? Like I've said, if you're thinking Gremlins, then Critters, then Ghoulies, I feel like I've missed one, the Munchies, but yeah, I mean, it's not even as good as Munchies, to be honest. So yeah, it is down the kind of the bottom of the kind of the barrel, but it's, you know, it's silly. I mean, it's like a knowingly schlocky B movie. If you like schlocky B movies, there are some kind of somewhat kind of like self-aware amusing moments here, and it's kind of, you know, so a little bit of a missed opportunity in certain areas, but I didn't think it was, you know, terrible, to be honest. I don't think it's like a necessarily a horrible movie. I'm still going to give this a fairly low rating because it isn't a good film, unless you are of the B-movie crowd, of which I know some viewers are here. But I don't think it is, you know, quite as bad as you might think. But realistically, if we're comparing it to other low-budget filmmakers and other low-budget films, yeah, there's not much here really, and it's just a kind of a rip-off plot with kind of very kind of cheap effects with somewhat skillful people that have made it, or at least kind of have developing skill. I'll give this one a 4 out of 10. I actually had some enjoyment whilst watching this, so I don't think it's quite as bad as you may think. Anyway, am I alone in thinking this one? I mean, it's 4 out of 10 is still a, you know, a below average score, but it's not as bad as some of these films that I've seen. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.